Let me start off by stating the cliche. Every dark cloud has a silver lining. Yes, education, especially in early years, is facing its darkest clouds. We all know that school closures due to COVID-19 left an estimated 1.5 billion children out of school across the world. As it is, much was remaining to be done to achieve the foundational literacy goals, especially in a challenging demography like India. The pandemic, however, has been a major setback. It cannot be denied that today, the colossal learning loss resulting from the school closures poses an unprecedented challenge to all of us working for the cause of education. However, the pandemic has also forced us to push our limits, to shift our approach, to quickly reskill and innovate, to bring in bold educational reforms. It has breathed new energy in educational debates and discussions. It has stirred new urgency in policymaking and systemic endeavors. And most importantly, it has strongly united all of us once again in our efforts to serve the world's most vulnerable children. And that is our silver lining. On this positive note, let me extend a warm welcome on behalf of Room to Read to each one of you for joining us in this webinar this evening. I'm Sukriti Agrawal from Room to Read, your host for today's event. This webinar, with its theme Learning in the New Normal, Multiple Ecosystems, would strive to answer some key questions around how to shape, leverage, and unite all the ecosystems around our child, be it home, community, or school, to ensure that our child has a learning-friendly environment enriched with opportunities of holistic development wherever she or he is. On this forum today, we hope to discuss the challenges and way forward to reach the unreachable, include the marginalized, strengthen the system, and empower the stakeholders, all to ensure that learning continues in the new normal despite all odds. Before getting on, Before getting on with the webinar's agenda, it gives me great joy to share with all of you that this webinar marks the successful culmination of Room to Read's nationwide learning campaign, Main Jahan Seekhna Wahan, where this time India got reading at home. This campaign's objective was to rope in parents and caregivers as true partners in their child's learning journey and to hand them simple and effective ways of engaging with their child for boosting the child's holistic development at home. We were playing some pictures from this campaign in the beginning of the webinar. We brought these highlights to you from Delhi, MP, Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, UP, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Telangana. During this campaign, we organized community events, community libraries, mobile libraries in different locations. We sounded the message through radio, video series, posters, and promoted family reading time avidly, all in all to bring parents and caregivers to the front line and to arm them with the essential motivation. Now, before we officially begin with the webinar's agenda, let me quickly go over a few housekeeping rules for a smooth run. To ensure that there are no disruptions during the webinar, audio and video options are disabled by default. We encourage our audience to share with the panelists, ask their questions through the chat option. In case you have any trouble with the audio, we request you to disconnect and rejoin. Also, we are hosting this session live on YouTube via the Room to Read page in case you'd like to join us there. We look forward to your enthusiastic participation and hope the discussions today are meaningful for all of you. With all things set, let's kick off today's event without any further ado. For this, I invite none other than Mr. Saurabh Banerjee, Country Director, Room to Read India, to make the welcome remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good evening. A very warm welcome to this annual Room to Read webinar on learning in the new normal, multiple ecosystems. For the past few years, Room to Read has been hosting this annual events to share our own learnings in the field of foundation literacy and also to learn from eminent experts working in this sector, both national and international. In the past, we have heard from the likes of Dr. Louis Crouch, Dr. Rano Perella, Dr. Elizabeth Pretorius, Dr. Marian Wolf, and today we are going to hear Dr. Tammy Katzel from the Haifa University, an eminent scholar of literacy and language. The background for this year's webinar, expectedly, has been the COVID pandemic and the havoc that it has created on educational systems all across the world, including India. Over the past 1.5 years, organizations like Room to Read and several others have been trying to reach out to children in their homes where they're stuck due to the school closure through various online and offline resources. Online classes, digital materials, these things have become very common even in government educational systems. Yet at the same time, we hear and we have found a lot of studies and reports pointing out to the fact that the digital resources and online education is not reaching a majority of the children, thereby widening the digital divide. In our own experience, we have found that physical materials like physical reading materials, self-instructional worksheets, storybooks, these have found we have found works better with children, especially engaging children in the literacy field. The other thing that has happened is due to this long school closure, it has also led to an emergence of the home and the community as a possible space for learning. Now, the importance of engaging parents and community in children's learning has always been acknowledged, but it has never been acted upon proactively as an education delivery channel, except for some few non-profit programs and projects. Under the current circumstances, however, this has become very imperative that we have structured interventions around learning from home. This is not only because schools are closed, have been closed, or are likely to be closed in the near future, but also that once schools are open, children come with a huge learning loss. And it's unlikely that the entire learning loss would be able to be addressed only through in-school instruction. So learning at home is going to stay and going to be a part of the education delivery process going forward. So the new normal post-COVID of education delivery is multifaceted. It involves learning at home and at school. It involves learning both through physical resources as well as through online, digital, and distant modes. And to make matters more complicated, this balance of home versus school learning, online versus offline learning, this is not homogeneous. This is going to differ from place to place, from location to location, depending on the access to internet, on governance systems, on the kind of people, children that we are addressing. So it's really very complicated. The challenge now for the education system is actually to deliver under this multiple ecosystems and keeping issues of access, equity, and quality in mind. We have an impressive array of speakers and panelists today who are going to discuss on this issue in much more detail and share their thoughts and experiences on this topic. I'm sure all of us will be highly enriched in the discussions that follow. So without taking any more time, I will hand it back to Sukriti to carry on with the proceedings of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saurabh sir, for setting a crisp and clear context for today's event. Now I'm very excited to invite Heather Simpson, Chief of Programs, Room to Read, to deliver this special address. Heather is responsible for the design, execution, and monitoring of Room to Read's literacy and girls' education programs in 16 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. She leads the development and implementation of Room to Read's overall educational program strategy and oversees the global programs team. With over 20 years of international development experience, Heather has been deeply committed to increase access to quality educational opportunities for disadvantaged children around the world. Welcome, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's such an honor to be here virtually with everybody. I'm going to share my screen and share a little bit of some of the learnings that we've been gaining from our colleagues, not only in India, but around the world as well. As Saurav mentioned, this is the biggest education emergency that the world has seen in recent history. And the children and parents and teachers and education systems are all doing some incredible things to try to address the students' needs during this time. And as we've heard already, more than 90% of the world's students have been affected by school closures during this pandemic. And UNESCO has been tracking the schools opening and closing. And as we know, a lot of the school systems will open for a while and close and open again. So it's not a constant situation. We see that many schools in the world have been closed for over 41 weeks over the last year and a half, which is a lot of school days that students have not been able to access their classrooms and access their teachers. We also know that with students not going to school, not going to their classrooms to see their classmates, to see their teachers, it's not only that they're missing learning opportunities, their routines are disrupted. They lose the anchor of the school as a center of where they can learn from their peers, where they can learn from their teachers and other school staff. Their movements are restricted. Their social interactions have been limited during this pandemic. And all of that leads to increased stress levels, and increased vulnerabilities that some students face as well. And all of this impacts their learning as well. So if you add together the fact that many students are not able to access their teachers or their peers, their stress levels are going up. Brain science shows us that with chronic increased stress, children have shorter attention spans, they have a lesser ability to focus and to learn, which is all the more reason why it's so important for all of us to work together to support parents at home, to really support their children to learn at home, to find joy in that learning at home, and for those parents to have some supports as well. They don't have to invent this all their own. We can support parents through this journey as well, and to increase that connection between teachers and school personnel and community members and students. So even if they're not physically able to get to school and open classrooms, that they still feel that social network of people surrounding these students to support their learning. We've learned a lot from different colleagues in different parts of the world, different organizations doing this, of how to help mitigate learning loss, how to address the missed learning, and also to help decrease potential dropout rates. The longer children are not going to classrooms, we've seen this from the Ebola pandemic in the past, that the longer children weren't going to the schools, the higher the dropout rates were. So again, by trying to think about the system slightly differently to support learning, even if children aren't going to schools, can help prevent some of those dropouts as well. It can also help, as parents are engaging with learning at home, this can also decrease stress levels for children. And in a little bit, I'll talk a bit more about some of the very practical things that some of our colleagues are doing with parents around the world. Again, this connection between teachers and parents has become even more important during this pandemic, and figuring out how systems can use telephone calls, socially distant yet visits from school personnel to parents in some parts of the world where that's possible, has been really important to make sure that community members and school personnel feel that they are part of the same team and they're supporting one another. Also adapting structured lessons for different media. So some parts of the world have very wide use and access of radio programming. So we've seen some fantastic structured lessons over the radio. We know that when school personnel are letting parents know that those lessons are happening at a particular time of day on a particular radio station, there's more likelihood that those homes will turn on the radio and those students will be able to listen to those structured lessons. So that's a really important thing. We've seen some powerful structured lessons on broadcast television as well. Again, in some parts of the world, children have access to watch television. In some places, the audio and the video programming is being accessed by children over cell phones. Again, this takes some negotiation for school personnel to help community members and family members feel comfortable to let especially these young kids access some of those digital tools. It does take a community to do that. And as Saurav mentioned, hard copy books, hard copy learning materials, self-guided learning materials at home are crucially important. These do not require electricity to recharge. As long as there is light, the children can see them, can engage in their learning opportunities. And it's also very important to support community members and family members to access those books, to support their students to learn, to read, to use these books and learning materials, even if they themselves are not literate. They still have the power to unlock literacy with their students. So all of this is really important to addressing and trying to mitigate the missed opportunity to learn during this time. We also know that as schools do open and close, the school systems are needing to increase their flexibility and figure out how to try to address the foundational learning, even if they have fewer hours in the day with students. Many schools in different parts of the world are going to multiple shifts or trying to reduce the number of students in a classroom at a certain amount of time. They're moving outside. In some places, there are fewer hours to dedicate to certain subjects. So again, this partnership between in-school learning as well as outside of school learning remains critical. Even before the pandemic, we knew students spent many more hours outside of school than inside of school. So life-wide learning is a really important thing for all of us to be working on together. I want to just quickly mention again, go into a little bit more detail on social emotional learning. Again, because it's International Literacy, we are celebrating the power of reading, the power of literacy. Literacy and books can be a really important tool to support students' social emotional needs. And during this education emergency, it's even more important than ever to support children's social emotional well-being as well. Reading books the brain can treat fictional characters similarly to real life experiences. So this allows students to engage and dream and think about different types of scenarios. Fiction stories are also an entry point to talk about some really complicated and tough topics. It can help students articulate their own emotions. It gives a tool for parents and caregivers to engage with these children about emotions, about their own needs. And literature can also be a tool to develop relationships and build that safety network around each other, which is so important. So we see real power in literacy. I'm going to do a quick reading just as an example of how we can support parents, how we can support librarians, how we can support teachers to engage with books to support children's social emotional well-being during this emergency. So here is a story. A seedling feels he's alone. He sees around ants, birds, stars, kids, even water drops are not alone. Everybody has company except him, and he feels sad. Then the rain comes and many seedlings germinate. With the sun coming in, they grow even more. The lonely seedling feels happy. And the more I can't see the rest of the story, but more seedlings grow and he realizes he's not alone anymore. And so then we can give parents and caregivers, teachers, librarians prompts to read this book and then ask some questions. This can inspire children to engage on these topics, to really use books as a way to open up conversations and to feel supported. So the seedlings feel alone. Have you ever felt alone? What do you do when you feel alone? And the children can engage in these types of conversations. And it's a really important tool to help children during this time. Again, we can develop and colleagues testing these things out and letting parents know and caregivers at home know, even as schools are closed, if they maintain a routine with their children, that's incredibly powerful. They can read aloud if they're literate. If they use books, even if they're illiterate, they can tell stories with the pictures. Those are all really important. They can sing, they can dance, they can play with their children at home. All of this is really important to support children's ability to decrease their stress levels during this time and increase their ability to learn. They can engage in arts and expression and great opportunities to express feelings. And so important, maintain social connections, even from a distance, so that these students know that they have a whole community who are working to help them. So with all of that, I want to thank you, and I look forward to learning from everybody here today. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can.
Thank you so much for that, for bringing in that really important message.
Thank you. I'm trying to stop sharing my screen now. Oh, there we go.
All right. So thank you so much, Heather, for bringing in this very, very important message, which is core to this, which is core to the entire reading campaign, core to all the endeavors, and it's going to be the key. It's going to be one of the key discussion points going forward. How do we engage parents, and how do we ensure that our kids have all the opportunities at home, with the parents, at school, with the teachers, for their holistic development. Now it's time for the keynote address. I'm very, very excited to welcome Dr. Tammy Katzel to deliver the keynote address. Let me take a moment to introduce her. Tammy Katzel is the head of Edmund J. Zafra Center for Brain and Learning Disabilities at Haifa University. She received her PhD in Applied Child Development at Tufts University and was an assistant professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in the Mind, Brain, and Education program. She was also a visiting professor of neurology at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, as well as a scholar in residence at the Stephen Weiss Academy School at Bel Air. Her research interests are around the cognitive and biological basis of reading development and reading breakdown in diverse populations. She has examined the role of fluency in reading in different orthographies, as well as the relationship between linguistic and social emotional processes in reading comprehension in reading from paper and screen. She's authored over 70 publications and is a member of editorial board for several leading academic journals. In the past few years, together with her colleagues, she has developed several nationwide innovative interventions focusing on foundational social, linguistic, and cognitive skills, promoting effective literacy, teacher training, as well as significant literacy gains in children. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Tammy. We are overjoyed to have you deliver the keynote for today's event. Suraj, can we, the audio is not, there is a glitch with the audio. Can we replay, please?
Let me start by saying this is such a challenging time in the world for youth. It was challenging even before COVID-19. What is the nature of childhood today? A recent OECD report reports that there are increased levels of anxiety and depression among youth, and this is even before we were all locked down at home. The Natural Literacy Trust reports that young people's reading engagement and enjoyment are frequently declined. This is a picture of my young boy 2 years ago, reading on a sofa, but at the same time, a phone is right next to him. So the children of today are faced with so many challenges of how to still recruit in reading where technology is all around us. When we think about the past year and a half, the whole world has experienced. It has put everybody at home very distant from one another and distant from schools. This is especially important for young children learning to read because first and second grade children as is face challenges regards the process of literacy acquisition for sure when they were not in schools. According to research, students who began the year 2020 to 2021, only 63 to 68% of them even made reading gains. These impacts are even more pronounced in children who started school and kindergarten below grade level. The loss of learning that children around the world have experienced, and this is the teacher trying to reach out to the children over Zoom, has been defined as unfinished learning. And this is a part of the challenge, but also the part of the hope. So rather than a deficit, unfinished learning suggests that with more targeted support, students can and will achieve mastery. What I want to talk to you today is about what are the challenges of distant learning, but also what are the hopes and how can we finish this learning and even use this time to learn more about the nature of education in the 21st century. And the main point I hope we all walk out of today is in any situation, but for sure in this situation, that any perspective on education should link cognition and emotion. And the two people in this picture are Freud and Piaget. Freud studied development in children and the more psychosocial aspects of development. And Professor Jean Piaget studied the more cognitive aspects. And interestingly, these two perspectives have rarely been linked. But I want to suggest, and this is a quote by a beautiful book by Douglas Newton, that in today's world, as he writes, there is often so much emphasis placed on the intellect that the interaction between feeling and thinking is rarely identified, yet alone addressed. Nevertheless, emotions can and do have a powerful effect on cognition and learning. And this is also so important in the development of language and oral skills, and of course, in reading. I also want us to look at these three pictures from different religions about the insights about teaching reading in different culture. The first culture on my left is probably a nanny. In medieval times, this is a statue teaching the child to read, and this is happening on her lap. This is a medieval statue. She is hugging him and holding him close. The middle picture is the teaching of ancient Hebrew to young children as young as 3 and 4 years old. And in Judaism, when the children learn to read, in Orthodox Judaism, the Bible, they get the Bible with some honey on it. And the children, as you can see in the picture, they lick the honey, and the association of reading is linked to something sweet and nourishing. And the third picture is a picture from a mosque where the young boys are reading together. So reading is something cultural, is something that is always said also in religious context within a society. And this is something that even during the times of distant learning, we can encourage and we can build on these strengths. Together with these strengths, the model that's going to hold for this talk is the RAND model. The RAND model was a model where 30 scholars from around the world in the field of comprehension, they met together to say, well, what are the most important things when we think about reading that we should address? Well, first, what are the texts? Are children reading interesting texts? Are they engaging with interesting stories? What are the activities that they engage in? Is it something practice? Is it something that makes them think? And I was so excited to see the books that the Room to Read have sent to me that is sentient culture and the culture of the family that provides many opportunities for discussions for the parents and later for the teachers with the children. And also, lastly, is the reader. Who is the reader? What is the reader coming with? What is the emotion of the reader? What are the background of the reader? And what does the reader prefer to do? All this is set also in the context of technology. In today's world, what is the technology that we are facing? How are we displaying information on paper or on screen? If it's on screen, can we play with the properties? And what is the nature of the interaction? So today, what I would like to talk to you is really how are we going to link, specifically during these times, cognition, emotion, technology, and reading. I first want to suggest to you and to present some research about the role of school and culture and family in reading development. Then I want to present some more recent research about distant teaching of reading. What are the challenges and what are the potentials? And I want to finish with just presenting very briefly a program we've been working with as an example of things that could be developed. And it's called the Island of Understanding. So when we think about reading, we can go from neurons to narratives. We can look at the role of emotions at the level of the brain, at the level of the mind, at the level of education. And really we can go through the role of the home, the role of the teacher, the role of the curriculum. And each one of them plays a very significant role in building these roots for children to become avid, deep readers. Research suggests that all of these factors are highly correlated to reading. The cognitive factors, linguistic factors such as vocabulary over the years and over languages, vocabulary is a very dominant predictor of reading, as is the ability to decode words. But emotions such as reading anxiety and reading self-concept, and also gender and social emotional status of children also play a very important role. So let me start by talking about the home. There is research in many languages, and we've done research in Hebrew and Arabic, that the home literacy environment, the number of books you have at home, is highly correlated to reading. Recent research suggests that when children listen to their mothers read, they activate emotion networks in the brain. So it not just also builds their vocabulary, but also just a deep bond with the mother. But children who are poor readers that did not have good interaction with their mothers, this is a recent study coming out of my lab, they perceive their mother as more controlling and negative. So what I want to suggest here is that we need to do training with the parents relative to what they can provide with the difficult lives many parents live, and how to have positive interactions, even with poor readers, around reading. We know that children who are born to healthy mothers don't develop as many gaps in reading as children who are born to mothers who are addicts. So the role of the mothers at the level of the brain and academic achievement is so important. We also saw that in families where you come from high social economical status, the parents use more academic words and more emotional words, and then the children develop more language. So in the instruction of parents, even from low SES, it would be important to include not just academic words, but also emotion words such as happy or sad or frustrated, so the children can also learn to describe their own emotion, and that has been linked both to reading comprehension and to reading fluency. We all know, so we talked about the family, and now I want to talk about the teacher. And I want to suggest that the teacher could be a prophet. In a study we've done recently, we trained teachers how to work with children on reading, and each teacher was paired with a child. In the beginning of the year, the child and the teacher had to rate the relationship, and the teacher also had to think or say how much he thinks their student will progress over the years. And what we found is that the teachers all got training on literacy. But teachers who had a good relationship with their student and believed the child will progress more, the children at the end of the year showed larger gains in reading comprehension. So the teacher could be a prophet. The teacher needs, of course, the skills and the pedagogy to know how to teach reading, but also to believe in the student. And when we ask the students at the end of the year, what helped you become better in reading? And the most prominent answer, I remembered how to read words, I wanted to read better, but the most prominent answer of the children was, the teacher believed in my ability to read. So the teachers really play a very important role as prophet of how much the children will increase. But in these days, the teachers are required not just to know about reading and writing and language and to have a good relationship with the student. We've all been thrown in, us including, to this technological world where they're supposed to know how to use computers and how to use Zoom and how to use digital games. And there's a framework that's called TPAC that talks about, do teachers know about technological and pedagogical and content knowledge in using this technology? And Professor Mishra is the one who developed this framework. We studied close to 200 teachers to see that we work with them in a poor city in the south of Israel, to see first and second grade teachers, to see, well, how are they dealing with this distant teaching? So first of all, 75% of teachers from low socioeconomic schools said their students had a lack of accessibility to classroom computers. So the first challenge was just to have the children access to learning. More than that, we saw that older teachers felt a lot of threat when they had to work with technology, and they did not feel proficient in that. They also ended up not really relying on good new technological games. At the end of the day, there was the textbook, and they read to the children the textbook, or they asked the children to do the textbook at home. So while they received knowledge, because we did teacher training with digital games and with digital access, the teachers felt they needed more training in really how to operate this digital technology. So this was a challenge, and this is something I urge you as a country to see how you're going to train the teachers to not just to know of technology and to know, of course, about literacy content, but to really use this technology in a helpful way. The last piece is the curriculum. Recent studies suggest that when you read to children narratives, this helps them at the level of the brain to build networks of understanding the other. If you read a story about a children who get into a fight and they have to see both perspectives, at the level of activation of the network, they start to understand others. And this others is also linked to empathy. And empathy is so important to develop these days of distance, but also empathy then back helps you in academic gains. So curriculum that is rich with rich content, especially narratives for young children, is very important to develop these networks of empathy. So we talked about the family and the teacher and the curriculum, but part of the curriculum today is how are you going to present the information to children? Are you going to present it on paper or on screen? And we've been studying this for a few years, and we found that younger students, their preference, and this is other studies as well, is to read from screen. But when you look at how they perform, most children in elementary school, but also adults, their reading comprehension is not as high reading from screen as reading from paper, which is to say maybe they feel confident that they did well, but as a species, we have to see how are we going to transition to reading from screens in a way that's also helping us at the level that the brain can process this information. So one thing that we found, and this is called a desirable difficulty, is that young children actually benefit from reading larger fonts, and older children actually benefit from reading smaller fonts in the sense that even if the font is a little bit too small for them, it makes them engage in the text. So it doesn't seem so easy. Sometimes the screen, we think, oh, it's on screen, it's easy, but actually to make it a little bit more difficult for them. Another thing we saw, look at this slide, there's a word that's very crowded. It says crowded versus space that is spaced. For younger children and for children who are low achieving children, spacing the words, making a little bit more space between the letter helps them decode words. So this is something we can use computers to actually adapt the font presentation to the reader's profile. So for younger children, larger font, a little bit more space, like textbooks, but really we can do it for each child at its own level. And for low readers and poor readers as well. So we can think about the advantages of distant learning where we can personalize reading one day. We can have optimalist text displayed in size, spacing, and color. And maybe one day we'll have an app for that. What did we learn during this year and a half? This is a very powerful slide. This slide suggests that if you look at children in 2020, and this is second grade children, this is how much they scored in what we call a word fluency test. This was their average if they came from high performing neighborhoods like high SES, medium SES, and low SES. This is the same schools, children a year later. And what we see is that children who come from low SES, you can see the green line went down. The children who come from wealthy families basically stayed the same. Even if you came from a wealthy family, maybe you even increased a little bit. But this is called the Matthew effect, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. These children went down. So if they did not have the support of their family, the low children went down. We saw the same thing with reading comprehension. So the conclusions are that remote learning was related to expanding gaps between low SES and high SES, where the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And another important conclusion is that we need to have more teacher training, both on how to teach reading in terms of decoding and vocabulary, but also emotions. And finally, during these times, how to use technology. And second, that we should engage the families in games and stories, just like I've been hearing. I was so excited to hear about the work of the foundation. So what are the hopes of technology in education? First of all, these are part of the skills that are required for the 21st century. And by using technology, maybe we can have children have better feedback, and maybe we can have better emotions. It doesn't need to be all of teaching, but it can be part of teaching. There's today a whole world of what we call gamification and digital games. It's when you use game design elements in a non-game context, for example, to teach reading. So it can help motivation and achievement, and there's much more reward that's tailored to the child. We just finished a study where we taught children words in 3 conditions. One was a digital game, one was a digital worksheet, and one was just traditional teaching. And what we saw that in the digital game, children actually learn more words and than in the digital sheet, and the digital sheet was more than control. So there is something to the practice that's technology based. And also there were more positive emotions when it was with the game. So this is very interesting and encouraging. So I just want to finish by telling you that we've developed a program that's called An Island for Understanding. Right now it's in Hebrew, but we're translating it to English, where we did a distant learning where the whole classroom, this is for 4th and 5th grade children, gets deserted on an island. And for 30 lessons, everything they read is to survive on the island. And they read about survival and about friendship, and then they leave the island. And within this program, we embedded technology, some practice, and it made the children feel part of the community, and we saw wonderful games. So if I want to integrate this brief talk, technology has its advantages. It can be adapted to foster personalized reading. Still reading even today, the benefit more for reading on paper, so we have to see what is the balance. There's an important role for family. There's an important role for teacher training. And technology can be an additive part. It's not going to replace teaching. It's not going to replace human interaction, but it can be embedded as an extension of learning, not a replacement. It can be mediating for tailored feedback, for self-paced practice, for instruction combining auditory and visual aids, just like we have now, and for some types of connected line among practices. I want to finish by a picture of my 2 sons to say nothing is going to replace human contact in reading. Nothing is going to replace family. Reading has to be taught with the feeling. Skills can be taught through stories, and we want to close all around the world these gaps in gender and SES, and to build a sense of community. So I want to thank all my collaborators in Haifa University, Harvard University, my mentor Marianne Wolf, and all the foundations who help with this work. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tammy, for that address. Thank you for sharing these insights into reading behavior, especially reading from screen versus paper, the Matthew effect, the key role of parents, and the need for teacher training, especially in harnessing technology to effectively enhance teaching learning outcomes. And to show us how emotions have such a powerful effect on learning. We have a number of questions coming up in the chat for you.
Hello, everyone.
Glad to have you. It's a privilege to have you here with us. We have a number of coming up in the chat, so I'll just read them out to you if you could address some of them. The first question is the neuron to narrative. The neuron to narrative is a brilliant perspective. Does this mean that socially sensitive texts are better for development of reading skills as well? Something as created with vocabulary control may not be emotionally appealing as such. What should be the balance of decodable and authentic literature in a classroom, according to you?
Yes, so the research I presented for sure supports the idea that texts that elicit emotions are very good for building what we call the theory of mind network to address the other. Now, reading has, the lower level skills. This was another question I saw about the role of phonics, which we have to do, and that doesn't always need to be embedded in stories. That can actually be done through apps, the practice of the phonics and the orthography. But at the same time, we can read to children even before they can read complicated text, even before they have the ability to decode. We can read literature to the children and build their emotion vocabulary and build also academic vocabulary. And as they get older, to infuse them with richer text that they read on their own.
Great. Thank you so much for taking that question. We have another one. This is from Pushplata. She's asking, children literature helps to connect thought and feeling. Can phonics teaching do that too? If yes, any examples?
Yes, so I think phonics, we have to remember phonics is a foundational skill. So I don't think phonics on its own will do that, but there's no reason to do one and not to do the other. My generation of researchers really believe that reading is multi-componential. So we have to have phonics and we have to have orthography. And we also then want to build vocabulary and we want to do this with feeling. So I think phonics, what we can do is have fun games, to do it in a fun way, to build this, and this is only for the beginning of reading, and this is opening the door, but not to do just phonics. Even if you do phonics part of the lesson, have part of the lesson to have discussions and talk about books. So it's the children don't just have this drilling, which is very important, it's necessary, but it's not enough.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have a number of questions coming up for you. There's another one. This one is by Satya Gopal Dey. He's asking, don't you think a manual for age-appropriate uses of technology and do's and don'ts with the children is the need of the hour?
Yes, I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that's absolutely the need of the hour. I think it will be wonderful to develop such a thing. There was a big competition funded by the X Prize Foundation where they gave tablets to children in Tanzania just with reading apps without teachers. And the results were not so promising. So the children, this was 6,000 children in Tanzania, and they learned actually the alphabet and the sounds of the alphabet, but they didn't progress more than maybe 2-3 months. And they didn't progress then to reading comprehension. So for sure, we need something. A manual sounds like a wonderful idea to develop.
Yeah, and related to that only, we've got another question. This is actually different. How can we deal with the attention deficit phenomena for digital intervention for reading development? I guess
I'm going to answer this as a researcher and as a mother. So I spent a year at home with my children. And for sure, even if they didn't have an attention deficit before, they've developed a Zoom attention deficit. I think we really need to train our children to be more independent and to realize that learning from the screen, as this question suggests, is very difficult for attention. It's very intense. The children see also many faces on the screen, and they have to see the teacher, and there's no touch. And also hormonally, there's no secretion, of oxytocin that helps us in attachment with the teacher. And I think we have to realize that it can't all be digital. Just as I presented data that children still read better from paper. We have to find a balance, and this is where the family can help, even in low SES. I mean, even 15 minutes a day that the parent does something with the child can help the bond with the child, can help the child do something that's not on screen. And we have to understand as a society that this experiment from teaching in a distance at large, it's not going to replace human interaction. There are benefits to it, like practice, 5-10 minute practice games, but it's not going to change the way we as a human race learn.
Yeah, striking that balance. Super important. Yes, which again, we have a number of questions coming up, so I have another one for you. You mentioned the linkage between emotions and cognitions. How can this play out in the classroom, especially as children return to classrooms after a long gap? What are a few things the teachers can do?
We're facing this right now. So I think one thing is to choose, first of all, to let children write. I haven't even talked about writing, but writing is very important, to let children write about their day and write about their year and write about the summer if they were apart. And then to choose exciting, relevant text for children. So this program I told you about, it's for 4th and 5th grade children. The children the whole year are like on a deserted island. And then everything they read about is related to the island. This is one program we developed. We're actually translating it now to English. So to have the children not come as the question about phonics, of course they're going to need phonics, but if phonics is not going to elicit their emotions. So if it's part of the day, that's wonderful. But another part of the day is to read about topics with the children, and even to use chapter books that the teacher every morning can read a chapter from the chapter book that the whole class listens to the teacher read, because even the voice of the teacher reading is something very soothing if it's done with empathy towards the children. I see the next question. I see the next question about orthographies. Orthographies for sure are related to reading development at the word level. So there are many cross-cultural studies. We studied also Hebrew compared to English and Hebrew compared to Arabic that affect the rate of reading development. So for example, Arabic is a very complex orthography that children learn to decode later because the letters, for each letter, there are 3 forms, and how it looks at the beginning of the word, in the middle of the word, and at the end. And this also affects the level of reading comprehension. So if in Arabic it takes 3 years to learn reading, maybe in Hebrew it takes a year. English is also a complicated language to learn because there's so many vowels, and the sound symbol correspondence is not always consistent. So one has to be very mindful to choose the texts that are related actually to the level of the orthography. Why to go to school if all the content available on digital platform and free?
Yes.
So again,
the other side of the coin.
Because this worldwide experiment has showed that distant learning cannot replace teachers. So of course we can use the free platforms to practice skills, but good, rich discussions have not been so much elicited, and I didn't share in this talk, but my colleague, Dr. Oli Lipka, and others have also studied what happened in distant learnings in universities, not just for young children. And university students all around the world have not been successful in learning, in distant learning. They come less skills, less efficient, their reading is not as deep. And also the data I showed is when you read on screen, you don't engage as much in deep reading and your comprehension is not as high. Should religious texts be made part of the curriculum for early grade children learning language? I think this really depends on the culture, the society, the culture that is teaching. So I think for some cultures, it makes wonderful sense. And for some cultures, it makes less sense. In Israel, we have religious schools that are religious, secular schools, and in religious schools, for sure, they include religious text. And for secular schools, actually, also they include some religious texts, specifically ones that are related to holidays and the lives of children, and then the children are engaged in it. What is the neural basis of oral reading fluency and reading comprehension? This is a big question. I can't answer it in one, like a short, I can send papers on it, but I would say multiple neuronal networks are involved in oral reading fluency, frontal areas and phonology, and in comprehension, of course, the areas of vocabulary and areas of theory of mind. So many brain areas are engaged both in fluency and in reading comprehension.
There are a few other questions that let me just read out. This one is by Rajendra Singh. He's saying education mostly dependent on technology, and technology has been merged with real life. Parents brought new phones to approach digital education for their children, but children have used it for games, playing games on YouTube. How do we take children away from phone and connect them to actual learning? Now, this is a very practical
Mary, for all of us who are parents, me too. I deal with this every day. I think we have to realize, and I'm saying this to myself as well, we are not even in the midst of the technological revolution, we're post the technological revolutions. I mean, the phones are here to stay. There's some benefits to them. There's also a price to pay. I think it's about regulation. It's like a diet, you know, we don't want children not to eat anything sweet ever, but we want them to be mindful consumers of the digital world. And I think when they're small, we have to really regulate it for them. We have to monitor what they watch, how they watch. Pediatricians talk about 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day. They were stuck at home, so some of these boundaries were broken. But I think we also have to train parents about it. And there is also useful technology. I mean, there are games, and you can learn about science, and you can learn about geography. And I think we have to provide parents also useful sites. And to provide them to the parents through the phones. And we have to provide with the list. So what are the things we've done when we worked in the south of Israel is we actually sent through the phones helpful games. And when the children received games that were fun about literacy, then they played them, you know, so the child is going to choose whatever is available to them. And we have to really help and guide also the parents in what to choose.
Yeah, I guess. And there is another question linked to this, which is a very critical question about online safety of the children. You know, how do we, when we are pushing or when we are encouraging the children to use digital mediums, how do we ensure their safety, their privacy?
Yes, that's a very important question. And I'm learning about it myself now with my young child. There are programs like security programs that I myself am learning about that you have to install on your phones, on your digital for safety, you know, and we have to be much more active in seeing what they're doing and checking their history and really keeping them safe, because there are a lot of unsafe things on the internet.
Yeah. So one last question, I guess, because we are on the time. Just to keep up with the time, let me just ask with this one last question to you. Different ecosystems often mean different socioeconomic disparities. How does one envision a learning environment which is qualitatively enriching for everyone, a learning that focuses on equity and is inclusive?
I think literature can really help with that. So I think, first of all, it is our responsibility and the wonderful work of the foundation, of departments of education, of researcher, to create wonderful curriculum. That with this wonderful curriculum, we can train teachers and we can also train parents. And this is a place where within the ecosystem, we can really strive to close socioeconomical gaps. I think the curriculum is a good vehicle to close these gaps. And I think technology, to some extent, used wisely, can help in giving positive feedback. And for this, as I presented the work on the teachers, we worked in districts where 75% of the children didn't even have access to technology. So we have to give the technology that is infused with good, rich content. And we have to train, and not just train the teachers, we have to continue to support them in their everyday life in the classroom and the families as well. This is a long process. This is not a short process, but I think children who received good education until they're 7 or 8 have so much stronger potential to then thrive, even if they come from impoverished backgrounds.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Tammy Katzel.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was a pleasure to have you here. You could read it from the enthusiasm of all the questions that have been directed at you.
Thank you very much, and good evening. This is our new year, so Happy New Year from Israel.
Happy New Year to you too. Thank
you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Let's towards the next session. And well, I'm so thrilled to tell you that it's time for the most awaited part of the event. That is the panel discussion on learning in the new normal, multiple ecosystems. We have an extremely venerable panel today with 4 eminent guests. They are scholars, academicians, practitioners, important decision makers who've made significant contribution to education in India. Most importantly, they are thought leaders who have influenced and inspired all of us. It is a true delight to have all of them on one panel discussing the critical topical questions around today's education scenario. I, for one, can't wait. So let me invite Meenal Sarda, Associate Director, Literacy, South Asia, Room to Read, who would be moderating the session to take charge and help start off the panel discussion by introducing our guests. Meenal, over to you.
Thank you, Sukriti. I want to start by welcoming everyone to this panel discussion on learning in new normal, multiple ecosystems. Building on the very important points made in the special address and the keynote address, we'll be talking about how to ensure coherence across all the ecosystems around the child, whether it's the home, the community, and the school. We are very honored to have with us today 4 esteemed panelists who will be sharing their thoughts with us. So before we begin our deliberations, I'd like to quickly introduce our panelists. The first panelist is Dr. Martin Chawan, known to most people in this audience, but at the same time very hard to introduce since he brings in such a wealth of experience. But briefly, Dr. Madhav Chawan is the co-founder of Pratham, which he set up to address problems of universal primary education. He expanded Pratham's reach from Mumbai to 2/3 of India with programs ranging from early childhood education to vocational training for youth. Over the years, he has pioneered large-scale innovations to address literacy problems amongst India's underserved children. Dr. Chawan was named a 2014 Asia Game Changer by the Asia Society. He also received the 2012 Wise Prize instituted by the Qatar Foundation at the World Innovation Summit for Education. This award has been equated to a Nobel Prize for the work done in education. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our next panelist is Usha Ji. Usha Ji is the co-founder of Jorogyan, which works in mathematics education. She took the initiative to start Jodogyan as part of her endeavors in technology policy. She started an experimental informal school where she works with children. This has played a pivotal role in her developing teaching learning trajectories in different subjects. The mathematics curriculum developed under her guidance has been under implementation in various schools for about 15 years now. Usha ji has published papers in the pedagogy of mathematics and has participated in various committees of NCRT, MHRD, NCTE, including in the ones for foundational numeracy. Thank you, Usha ji. We also have with us Sheshagiri K.M. Rao, known as Giri to most people around him. Giri works as an education specialist with UNICEF, and he is currently based in Hyderabad. His professional interests include early childhood development and school education. Over the years, he has engaged in these fields by working with children, developing educational interventions, doing research, and writing on contemporary educational issues. A special area of interest is putting together chronicles of people's narratives. His first book, The Gentleman Who Taught Infinity, is based on a mathematics teacher. Giri is currently working on his second book, which is a work of history located in education. Thank you, Giri, for joining us. We are also happy to have with us today Shailendra Sharma, who is the principal advisor to the government of Delhi. Shailendra began his career with Pratham in 2002 and is a member of its leadership team. In his current role with the Delhi government, he works with the Education Minister and the Directorate of Education in conceptualizing and implementing the education reforms in Delhi. Shailendra is part of the State Planning Group to develop the NEP 2020 implementation plan. He is also a member of Delhi State Advisory Council under the Right to Education Act. Thank you for joining us, Shailendra. And I would request all of our panelists to switch on their videos so we can look at, we can have that question answer session. So to kick off, okay, thanks. So to kick off our discussion, I want to start with a question for Usha ji and Giri. So we all know that learning at home is a reality during COVID, and we just heard so much about it during the previous keynote and the special address. How, in your view, do we best support the quality of learning at home for children, including for those from a socioeconomically deprived background? So Usha ji, I would request you to share your thoughts first.
I think when we are talking about the new normal, so I think there's also the possibility of thinking about what the new normal can be. And so I think I think I missed your question, actually. Did I? Can you just say that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah. So we just talked so much about learning at home and how children's learning is being supported at home right now during COVID.
Yeah.
How do we best support the quality of learning at home, especially for children who are coming from a marginalized background? So is my question clear now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the question is, when we are thinking about the new time into which we are going, and the aspect of COVID has really opened up and made us take a pause and look at what are the possibilities. So I think whether it is a question of children from more underprivileged sections or even others, there's a kind of, I think, two pathways which are open in front of us. One is that we look at it merely in terms of using different modes, instead of looking at it as face-to-face, and now it is online. how do we, combine the two and go further? Another way of looking at it is that can we really think in terms of developing a system in which children would really, for example, develop literacy in the sense which we think about it. See, if we think of literacy as a tool for communication, where it's actually developing as an additional tool for human communication as a further development along with and intertwining with oral language. And we see another tool for communication. And then we will maybe devise solutions which would be quite different and which would be equally but differently applicable both in the face-to-face section and when we are having the online digital medium. So I think this is one particular thing, how we look at it. So I think quite a lot of what would happen would depend upon how we, the people who are involved in it at the policy level, at making of the thing, how we are going to be looking at it.
Go on, because he may not be able to connect with me from on the screen.
So the difference, I think, the application for the more underprivileged section or for them, it could have a similar kind of an impact. Because the key thing, as Dr. Tammy was also saying, the key aspect is the fact, the emotional, the content, what is the context and how reading and also writing takes place. But for many of us, we still do consider reading as really, alphabets, words, and then text, rather than as in thinking as a tool for communication. So I think this is a challenge which we are facing and which would be equally applicable for any place. And so especially if you are going to be involving parents, then how do we communicate the new pedagogic idea? What we have learned in the last 20, 30 years is really asking us to look at how literacy, how learning in general gets built up. So how do we do that? Because many of the parents would have learned themselves in a very different way. And we are asking them to teach their children, to sit with them and to read. So a lot of hand-holding, a lot of the thing has to happen, and that communication needs to be there. But at the same time, I would say that actually the new medium does give us new possibilities. See, this is something which we have seen, because we know that it is a part of the communication. It's actually a communicative event, and we cannot, reading or writing doesn't start with letters. So, for example, we have experienced a tremendous impact of scribbling. Children, we know naturally scribbling is a kind of a pre-reading activity. And since scribbling and sharing the, even a mobile in order to interact with each other, to talk about it. So this can really open up new ways. So how we use the technology, I think, depends on what is our vision and what is our understanding about literacy itself in reading, how we look at it. So this is what I think I would say to be able to begin that thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think very pertinent points for children belonging to different backgrounds. And you've talked about the opportunities that are available as well. So both sides of the coin. Thank you for highlighting that. Giri, would also like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Meenal, and thank you to Room to Read for this opportunity. I'm not sitting in an office or a home space. I'm right now sitting in my car because I'm in the middle of something else. But I've been hearing this conversation for some time now. I think, if there's one thing that the pandemic has taught us, it is this, that we have multiple spaces, that we have spaces outside of school that we need to look at a lot more seriously than we have ever looked at before. So I think in that context, if we consider the fact that children spend a lot of time outside of school, in their homes and in their communities, it becomes important for us to find out what is it that these spaces can offer. And I might, I would like to go back to some of the very exciting work that we did in, the context of Chhattisgarh. And Meenal, you have yourself, seen some pieces of that work, some years ago. We had this program on parenting. Of course, I'm talking about, an experience in the context of early childhood and in the context of young children. We found that if we are able to reach out to parents with clear, simple, doable messages about what they can do at home to promote cognitive development, language development, etc., in children, then that can have a very significant impact in terms of developmental trajectories for children. So if I take that example and extrapolate that to what schools can do with and what parents can do with older children, I think those possibilities are quite a lot. And we have probably just begun exploring some of those. The problem is that parents do not belong to any one particular department like teachers or Anganwadi workers do. So unless it becomes a matter of policy, state policy and mainstream education programming. Right now, you hear about the home as an important space and what parents can do and so on. But then it would be sad that if this particular interest in the home space and in what families can do disappears after schools, start functioning normally. I think what happens in families, what can happen in families and what happens within the larger neighborhood uh, are complementary to what teachers and schools do. And we must, look at these spaces a lot more seriously. Again, quoting from experience in Chhattisgarh around 2018, and this is pre-pandemic times, we did a program called a Seek, in which we worked both with parents and community volunteers in about 400 villages to see whether they could play complementary roles. They could actually help children with foundational learning and strengthen whatever they were learning in school. And I'm happy to say that an external assessment of this program showed that with the right kind of inputs going to parents in terms of what they could do at home, and with inputs in terms of what interested people, volunteers within communities, local communities could do for children, we did find that it had an immediate impact on children's reading abilities and comprehension. So I think this is an area which is rife with potential, and we must look at it as part of a triangle, in which the school is sitting in one place with its entire infrastructure, the educational department, but then the local community is available. There are several people in that community who can work with children, who can bring their own unique inputs to the table, and of course the home space, parents, caregivers. And when I say caregivers, these can be older siblings, these can be grandparents, and so on and so forth. So all of these spaces are rife with potential. They cannot be compared to what the teacher does in school, but they bring their own unique abilities which can help children learn better. And it's even with families where there are adult caregivers who may not be literate, or who may be non-literate. I think a lot can still be done. That is what our experience indicates.
Yeah. Thanks, Kiri. Absolutely. I clearly remember visiting that project and the power of parenting that it had, brought out and demonstrated in pre-COVID times. And that's also been our initiative, how to continue to strengthen learning at home. And we've always known that parents and communities are important stakeholders, but I think COVID has brought it to the forefront in a way that hasn't happened before. So thanks for your insights.
Just one
Yeah.
additional point, Meenal, sorry, it just comes to me, which is I think we pay lip service to what we can do with, I mean, for example, if you look at the way we work with SMCs, school management committees, it's all lip service. I mean, money is allocated, training is done, money is spent, all the modules are made and so on. But at the end of the day, I don't think we are meaningfully engaging, parents there. In fact, half of the SMC members are parents, and, so on. In fact, more than half, I would say 14 out of the 16 members. The second thing is in the Right to Education Act, we talk of the panchayats being the local authority for education. But in most places, neither does the Panchayati Raj department know what they should be doing, or the education department doesn't want to engage with them. So there are all these laws and legislations and possibilities that are there, but I don't think we have grabbed those possibilities and opportunities to really look at a collective effort for children's learning. I think gone are the days, when we can rely on the schools to do the job entirely. We have seen that that's not working as per, our desire and wishes. I think we should look at other spaces as well and make it a collective effort, a partnership, actually. That time has come now.
Yeah, totally agree. So actually, that leads to the next point that we want to discuss is actually moving a little bit towards solutions. So from all of the panelists, I would request you to share initiatives that your organization has undertaken on scale in the current scenario, specifically reflecting on what is working and what are some of the challenges. Dr. Chawan, may I request you to go first, please?
It's very difficult to say what is working, because the question is, what did you want to work? You see, pandemic was not the time to strive for completion of curriculum or learning from textbooks and so on. That's where we first started up. So when the school started closing, the first thought that occurred to us was that this is not about textbooks and teaching and syllabus and so on and so forth. The first thing is for children to stabilize, not to get anxious. The whole thing about children, because the feelings are everywhere, was of fear. There was death being talked about. There was all kinds of pandemic things we talked about. So we decided to float a campaign. It just started very quickly, within 15 days of school closure. It was called Corona. You know what Corona is, but Corona is in Hindi is Karo Na, Thodi Masti, Thodi Padhai. So we started sending, which was picked up everywhere later on. We started sending WhatsApp messages with PDFs and so on, which had simple, shall we say, questions, quizzes, games to play, and so on for children to take. We were trying to figure out at the same time how many children would receive this. Getting WhatsApp messages requires a smartphone. So how many people had smartphones, and what about children who don't have smartphones? So we started working on SMSs for children, because we know that more than 90% people have some phone or the other. And we found out that about 60% population, families, have smartphones, but the remainder don't. And even among smartphones, only one person in the family has a smartphone. So there was a whole issue of access. But nonetheless, we started doing this, and the SMS started working. We also started working with government of Uttar Pradesh, government Bihar, to start TV programs. We offered our content. Luckily, we had been working on digital initiatives 4 years before this. We were experimenting with digital stuff, digital learning. How is digital learning possible? But not in schools. I believe that digital learning in the schools in the current environment, I don't mean current, by current I don't mean pandemic environment, but in the current kind of schools, the normal schools, not the new normal schools. What happens is when you put, say, digital innovations inside the school, it gets completely distorted, because everything boils down to teachings, what's in the class, what's in this textbook, and what's in the syllabus. The thing about digital devices and digital solutions, if you will, is that they are all non-linear. While our teaching methodology, our curriculum, everything is very linear. Of course, there is some linearity in what you learn first and what you learn later. But the funny thing about digital technology is when you give it to a child, and if it's internet also available, then you don't know what the child will land up. I mean, hopefully it will not be really bad, but the child can start learning anything. You can't tell the child you can't learn fractions or algebra if you're in the second standard. If he wants to learn, and if he can learn, he will. Why not? So anyway, so one of the main thing we did was we started sending these messages and started working with governments. One particular example I want to give is how to organize a mass scale programs is that one of our leaders in Maharashtra, Smitin Brid, started a program called Shale Baharchi Shah, school away from school. So what he would do with a radio jockey, so to say, would put up a program on radio, and All India Radio broadcast the radio program, and it caught on. It went to 33 districts of Maharashtra. Gram Panchayats picked up, and then we said, okay, whatever is being broadcast on the radio also had some questions. It had games. It had communication with the mother. So there were funny activities like how many teeth does your grandmother have? So if you have the grandmother, you go count her teeth, real or otherwise. Or simple things like you count how many spokes does a bicycle have, a bicycle tire have. So you find out that these are not ordinary, these are not calculations, these are not routine textbook things, but children started enjoying. So the idea was to engage children and not teach syllabus. That was the first thing. Once you start engaging children, they want to learn. Then they may learn on their own. They may learn from their textbooks also. But engaging is the first thing. So we did that. And in the first phase, engaged the children in doing this. And Pratham has been working in what now we are calling mohallas. So in a village, you divide the village into mohallas. And in the mohallas, there are volunteers. And then we worked with the volunteers, gave them an understanding of how to work with children, and we gave them materials. We did the same with mothers. So it was not as though we were giving children digital access, but to volunteers and mothers who could help the children, who could teach the children, or who could help the children learn, I would say. And that is the strategy that we follow. Of course, there are other things that we did, but I think I'll take up too much time. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for outlining all of these interesting initiatives, and I think such insightful points about technology being non-linear, about this pressure to complete the syllabus, and working on the motivation of children. Thank you so much. Shailendra, I would request you to share next.
So thanks, Meenal, for calling me last, because in this panel, I am feeling like a child who is sharing the dais with his principal, with Madhav being over there. So, so I'll pick up where he left, and sharing on behalf of, say, Delhi government, I would like to point out first as to what we did not do. And here are the things that we did not do really. First and foremost, as a government, we did not jump on this online teaching bandwagon, which was, I mean, if I trace back to March 2020, when schools started shutting due to COVID, one of the things that we started hearing state after state was the resumption of, or rather initiation of, online teaching learning. We did not do that. Next, what we did not do was we did not go to a radio channel or to TV channel to have a designed program being broadcast over there. And there was a conscious decision about that. Why we did not do any of these things. Because with respect to online, we were aware of, say, digital penetration and access to smartphone and internet things. And a lot of chaos was there at that point of time. A lot of uncertainty was there. So at that point, starting something like this did not look like a feasible option to us. But having said that, what we did was clearly bring in the learnings of the past into play. And our learning over the previous 2-3 years before the pandemic set in when we started a very structured parent-teacher meeting phenomena in the schools of Delhi government. One of our learning from those parent-teacher meeting is that very often parents do not have any, anything to talk to their children. And this phenomena we saw started happening as the child grows. Because once the child starts going to school and attending school regularly, I would say that there simultaneously some kind of alienation also starts happening of the child with parents on teaching learning things. And this happens very in a very pronounced manner, particularly with the first generation children. Because parents also sometimes do not feel very confident. What should I talk to the child? And that is why when parent-teacher meetings started in Delhi's schools, one of the things after a couple of meetings was to start sharing some kind of a script. What kind of communication, what kind of conversation you can have with your child, and that helped a lot. For example, in terms of reading, like one of the things which parents would say, and I'm saying a very obvious thing, that many often after 2-3 years of school, parents would say, I am assuming that my child can read. And when you tell that here is a text, this child cannot read, it comes like a surprise because they believe that schooling is equal to learning. And therefore, when the child is coming to school, then this is the most obvious, this is the most basic thing that should have happened. And if it is not happening, it comes as a surprise because everything that they are supposed to do at their level, they have been taking it off. So this missing piece of dialogue is something that we had initiated through parent-teacher meeting. And that approach came in very handy when we had to suddenly close schools in 2020 March. And we immediately launched a program called Har Ghar School or Har Parent Shikshak. And what we did in that was to send out SMS, because we again realized that probably even sending WhatsApp message may not be an appropriate thing. To send out a very small message, here is what you can do. Here is a topic on which you can have conversation. Here is what certain activities that you can do. But because of the limitation of the characters in SMS, what we had to quickly jump on was to start sending IVR message. But that did not click. We realized that this is not working, because the callback number was very small. So hardly 10% parents would call back to hear the IVR message. So therefore, we had to stick to that. And at some stage, we had to rope in our teachers. After sending the message, maybe you can call up the parent to tell what you have sent and how they can engage in that conversation. So I think that is the approach we followed in the initial months. The key here again was engagement with children. And as Madhav said, the idea was not to kind of say get on to any syllabus and completion of that, because that was clearly not the priority, and neither was that going to work in any way. But engagement was critical. First of all, even knowing where the children are, in what circumstances they are, and if any other kind of support that the school can render besides the teaching learning thing, that also should be factored in. So this engagement was key. And I would also want to add, and taking from what Tammy said earlier, that you see, hearing the voice of your own teacher and an assuring word goes a long way. So this missing piece had to be established very early on. So teacher calling the parents, and through that also talking to their children, made sure that this contact and engagement stays. And that is the reason why we realized that after 3-4 months, our connect with roughly 60 to 70% children could be established. Many who had migrated away from Delhi could not be brought in because the parents had changed the numbers. But slowly and gradually, when this message reached them that somebody from the school is looking out, there was a call back from the side of parents also. So this, coupled with what Tammy again said, that 15 20 minutes of a structured conversation between children and parents can go a long way. So what I would say in a nutshell was, starting from 2020, when we were just responding to the emerging situation, to going throughout the years, we ourselves have also reinvented several times. So from sending SMS messages, having a phone call exchange, to getting onto a kind of, say, worksheets, where once we realized that many parents and families have come back to Delhi, we resumed this process of sending a very small worksheet, which was again designed by our teachers, not more than a page long, with some instructions for the parents, and sending that over the WhatsApp, and giving the option to the parents, those who were not on the WhatsApp, to come, say, once a week to the school and collect the printout themselves. And also following it up with the phone call to explain what needs to be done. And what we realized was a very interesting thing in that by November, December, we almost, like, about 80 to 85% parents could take it from the WhatsApp, and about 10-12% parents would come to school to collect that. And from there, the response rate, because one of the reasons why we were not jumping onto the radio or the television platform was, and this our teacher shared, this would lead to, say, one-way communication. So we would be able to tell what is to be done, but from what are we going to get from there? How do we know that this has been received and what is coming from there? So having this worksheets and creating this mechanism that whatever child does, whatever activity child does, those worksheets can be filled in and brought back. So we could get, like, children in their notebook doing something. So if there is an activity, how many flowers did you see today, or in your previous textbook, can you draw that and send back? So children drawing those flowers and sending back. I mean, how many cups you have in your house, in your kitchen? What did you do with your mother today? So those kind of activities being sent, and, say, for example, reading certain text, and what some questions that followed is, okay, so what was this character doing? If you were in the place of that character, what would you be doing? So children responding on that and clicking the photograph and sending it back to the to the teachers. So I think what we managed to do in that situation was to keep evolving and reinventing ourselves as the situation unfolded. The idea was to stay engaged with the children, don't lose sight of children, stay connected, try different things and see what works. The whole point was that children and teachers, and assisted by their parents, this relationship should be intact. So that is what we did. And as I said, what did not work was this IVR approach. That did not work. And also at times, we could see that 5 to 7% children were not in contact. So that was proving to be a difficult thing, because once our teachers were in that mission mode to reach out to every child, even if one child was missing from this contact, they were worried. So I think this was some of the learning over the last 1.5 years, during which we invented ourselves several times.
Thank you so much, Shalendra. First of all, you're not last on this point of what is working, you're going second. Usha ji and Giri will be sharing next. And thank you so much for summarizing so well what is working, what is not working, and the very important point you made on the need for reinventing ourselves. So it's such an unprecedented situation. You try something, then you realize it doesn't work, then you try something else. And that's also, the kind of privilege we have to give to ourselves, that we will try something, maybe make mistakes, but then it's okay. You keep trying till you figure out this two-way interaction that you talked about, so important between teachers and children. Thanks a lot. Usha ji, I would request you to share next.
Yeah, I think like everyone, we were also trying out to see how do we do? How do we reach out to children? And we know that what is very important is to see to it that it is interactive between teachers and children. The interaction, that feeling of being there. It's that communicative aspect of it. How do we keep it? And what we did is made small groups, and through WhatsApp video call, we connected to children. Of course, in Kerala, of course, there are quite a lot of there are few children who had problems where the panchayats tried to help some of them. This was, of course, a program called Manjati. But in Delhi also, where we were in connection, we did use the mobile video call, WhatsApp call, because everyone is quite comfortable with WhatsApp. So WhatsApp call with all the problems there. But what we found was that, completely new vistas came up, new possibilities, which was not there when children were actually in front of us. For example, one of the things which we did was, sprouting. And the way their children looked at, and they said, "Ma'am, mera aaj na ek patta aa gaya," and sharing it among each other, taking photographs. So we had live video chats along with groups, so each class had a message group in which they would share. And you have to have flexible kind of timings for the WhatsApp video chats, video calls. So it was a video call complemented by the WhatsApp message group. And so that we were able to actually continue with an interactive kind of a medium. And we found that we could go, when they looked at the seeds, which when they came, because it lasted for long, and sharing all the kind of the things, we have been just trying to talk, even if children are coming, do keep this aspect of it, not in order to teach, to do that kind of connection. And here in Kerala also, what happened is that children were learning about perimeter, what is called chuttalava. And after first they measured their own head, then we said, well, can you go and find a tree which has the same as your head, the same perimeter as your head? So children went out and they were looking and they were sharing. This is a kind of a possibility. So that how do we really see it with that live contact and that kind of a thing? How do we keep it? And I think we all know that, learning, what it is about, it's a real socio-emotional learning or other cognitive development. They can't be really separated out. And even though we were doing so-called mathematics in that sense, but many parents talk to us that she's talking now more. She used to be very quiet. Now she is changing. So we even saw such kind of things which parents were talking about. So real live kind of a contact, I think, of course, it's not at all the same as being there in the thing, because once the sites opened and children came, the happiness, of course, one can never compare that. So this was something, but what is needed is the schools to play a pivotal role. See, schools with a pedagogic orientation, etc. And so if they have to be volunteers, they need to be maybe connected. And that kind of linkage, of course, is still something maybe in the new normal we could think about. So that we are using our understanding about how we learn, what we have, because very often we talk about 21st century competencies, but they need to be also supported with 20th century understanding, how do we do that? And what we also know, and what we found that, although it is true that parents might have learned in the old way, but given a chance, because they understand when children are happy. And that is a kind of a big strength for all of us, to be able to change the paradigm. So I think there are possibilities, and that can become maybe the new normal, very different kind of a thing. Yeah, I think that's
totally. I mean, such beautiful examples of things that can actually continue in the new normal as well, which we are discovering now because of this situation. Thank you for sharing that. Giri, would you like to share next? Is Giri still connected?
Yeah, I am there, Meenal. I had a connection problem. I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
connected. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So was there
So
something that you were asking? Sorry, I couldn't hear at all.
no worries at all. So basically about sharing what is working in the current context. So what have been
Yeah.
some of the initiatives that perhaps UNICEF has taken? What is working
Right.
and what continues to be some of the challenges when you're trying to take initiatives at scale?
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think, as I was saying earlier, what we attempted in Chhattisgarh, uh, last year as the lockdown started, there were two initiatives that we attempted. One was we wanted to reach out to parents of young children uh, through messages that were addressed to them, that were addressing their anxieties, and at the same time giving them a sense of what they could do with young children at home. So that resulted in what we called as the Sajak program. In fact, the second version of the Sajak program, where we designed simple audio messages, and through the Anganwadi workers, these were shared with parents. I think we've got very positive responses from the districts to this very simple, but what seems to be a very influential kind of initiative. Uh, for the first time, parents directly being addressed, being, uh, you know, uh, there was a dialogue around what they could do at home to stimulate young children's development. This year in particular, a lot of attention has been paid to parental anxiety in this program because, particularly after the second wave, there was this realization that there's simply no point. I think in the name of home-based engagement, we shouldn't just issue a set of instructions to adults about what they should do. I think we must be mindful about what they are going through, their anxieties, their struggles, and the difficulties and challenges that they're facing. And unless any program of parental engagement addresses these concerns, we cannot just expect them to automatically start doing something with children. So that's something that has been paid a lot more attention to. And it definitely looks like the Department of Women and Child Development is going to be continuing this program for a much longer time. The second intervention, as I mentioned briefly earlier, is called Seek. And through the Seek intervention, I think we tried to activate these other two spaces that I was talking about, the neighborhood space and the space at home. And the program attempted to, again, using both digital and non-digital modes. And the non-digital modes comprised of thousands of community volunteers who were mobilized by the Department of Education and the district administration right now in 13 districts across Chhattisgarh, where at one point of time we had 15,000 volunteers spending at least 1 or 2 hours, 2 or 3 times or 4 times, sometimes a week with children. So now one might argue saying that what do these volunteers know? They've not been trained. They, you know, they cannot be expected to do something that is progressive and so on. But then I think what is surprising pleasantly is that when a young volunteer who is himself or herself a student, and who's part of the community gets together with a bunch of young children, a lot of interesting things happen. One is, of course, they do a lot of talking with each other. There are not too many hierarchies. They can play with each other. They can talk to each other in the same language, in their mother tongue, which is the other advantage. So we designed a very simple manual called Pitara for the volunteers, and the Pitara had very, very simple instructions about how do you do a simple, activity in language. What can you do to teach this particular thing in mathematics and so on. So this is something that has continued over the last, I think, 17, 18 months in Chhattisgarh. Many more districts have expressed interest in it, but then because of bandwidth issues, we were not able to do it. One challenge, of course, is that volunteers come and go because they're actually volunteering their time and effort. They're not paid any amount of money. So that is going to be a challenge in terms of any volunteer effort. And the question, therefore, is how do you create this culture of volunteerism in communities so that at any given point of time, there are at least 2 or 3 or 4 people who can work with children going to school, who can support them after school hours or before, for about either before school or after school, 2 or 3 times a day? And how can we find ways of preparing them and training them better? So I think these are the 2 interventions that I would single out as being very encouraging for us, very positive. But then I must say that they're works in progress. There are lots of challenges around these. But then, as I said earlier, if one wants to activate the home and community space, then one must, work on these lines and see how the issues of learning can become a community responsibility rather than just being the responsibility of the teacher. Now, neither will the neighborhood nor will the parents ever replace the school teacher, but then they can complement that person in very critical ways. Over.
Thanks, Giri. Absolutely. And I think the example that you've given, where you're utilizing community volunteers to interact with the children, is again very interesting. So thanks to all of you for sharing all these wonderful initiatives and ideas. And I think we have a lot of food for thought here. I also want to remind the audience to keep posting their questions in the chat for our panelists. We'll be taking up all the questions at the end. So the next one is for you, Shailendra. Since you work closely with the government, how do you think Nipun is to be operationalized real time on the ground? So, in terms of the challenges and the way forward, keeping in mind different contexts now that we have a program which addresses many of the concerns that, have been raised in the past, how do you think Nipun should be operationalized on the ground?
So frankly speaking, I don't know how that will happen. I mean, my knowledge about this or my understanding about this is as much as you would be having. What we are gathering is that as almost like 1 year has passed since the adoption of the new national education policy. So on that occasion, several events were organized to celebrate that a very important day. A lot of communications going to different states in terms of which different aspects of the education policy that has to be implemented. A very detailed guidelines on Nipun has also been circulated, and my understanding is that a lot of emphasis is being laid on training the teachers and creating content so that the goal of foundational reading and numeracy can be attained, as this document says. But when this document came for our review, what we were also looking at is that, and this is the issue with any new approach that is adopted in our country. It basically doesn't lay out very clearly as to what is it that you are changing from the past. You talk about you're introducing something, but what is it that you would want to replace it with? So at one place, it talks about shifting towards competency-based learning. But what it is shifting from is at least not clear to me and my colleagues in the government who we were trying to understand. What it says, on the other hand, but if I were to look at it, it says all the right things as to what should be the emphasis on learning in the early foundational years. So for example, by the time the child reaches grade 3, she should have attained foundational reading and numeracy abilities. So as a result, a lot needs to be done in the first 3 years, particularly in the early childhood education segment and the first 2 years of the primary grade. And a lot of emphasis on creating, say, localized material and building capacities of the teachers. But at the same time, unless we understand that the approach which was followed earlier, how this is going to be different and in what way are we going to build capacities of the teacher and who is going to do that? Because the danger is that the task of taking it forward eventually will go back to the people who have already been following the existing approach. So at the moment, my answer to that would be that the intent is right there on the table, and we all wholeheartedly agree with that, but the process which has to be laid down in translating that intent into action is not clear. In fact, today itself, before while planning for this meeting, I was talking to the people in SCRT of Delhi and other academic branch people. Can you like give me some pointers as to how this is going to happen? So there is, I would say that there is not much clarity on that front. And as soon as we have more clarity, probably you can organize another webinar and we'll come back to share that.
Sure, we'll keep that in mind. This is something which is going to take a couple of years, to implement in its true spirit with all the intention. And we'd be happy to have another webinar to talk about challenges, best practices. Thank you for giving us that idea. But also thank you for your candid comments and, just highlighting what is there which can work, as well as things to keep in mind when going forward. Thanks, Shalin. Sorry. Coming back to the issue of reaching underserved children, Dr. Chawan, I wanted to ask you, given your experience of reaching children who are marginalized, what are your thoughts on reaching children, especially in the current context, especially those who do not have access to technology and ones with special needs? So I know you talked a little bit about that when you were sharing what is working, and also some initiatives that Pratham had taken pre-COVID. But right now in the COVID context, I think the big question on everyone's mind is how do you reach marginalized children who cannot access technology, and also children with special needs? If you could shed some light on that.
I think most children have been reached by the schools. So to say that we have not reached the marginalized children, well, those who have not been reached are marginalized. That's all that we would say. But our ASER survey report, which comes out annually, has been saying that if you look at the enrollment, if you ask parents, is your child enrolled in school, then 97, 98% will say yes. Now, what does it mean to reach a child? So if the child is enrolled in school, have you reached him or her? Or is there more? So going to school and schooling is education or more than that. So I think when you say that we want to reach the child, it is really the child should be excited about education. The child will be excited about going to school, surely. But what about learning more? You see, the single most thing that is lacking, perhaps, one of the problems of education at any rate, is that there is no motivation to learn. Why would I learn? Who is encouraging me to learn? That's where you say that the teachers have to be, the relationship between the teacher and the child is something that is important. So when you say reach the child, it is really about touching the child, if you will, to be able to get the child interested in learning and interested in the classroom. That is a difficult one, because the way the classroom is designed, the child, our organization has been talking about over-ambitious curriculum. Here is a child who doesn't know how to read properly, and you are pushing a book in front of him or her, which talks about things that he can't read. First of all, she can't read, and then how do you say you are going to reach the child? That's a general picture that we're talking about. The other way that people talk about reaching a child, unreached child, is geographically unreached or socio-economically unreached. That's even a bigger problem. That there is a problem. I really don't know how you would do that, because it has to be done locally. It is not something that can be done from Delhi. It cannot be done it's from state capitals. You should be able to decide some strategies so that children in the local areas can be reached by local volunteers, local teachers, local self-government. And this is where it is lacking, because there is no motivation to teach, there is no motivation to reach. We just don't have the culture. We don't have the culture. So that, how do you develop that? Once that is developed, everything else is possible. How is it that NGOs can reach the children and governments can't? Why is that? So I think you need to say that there are these children that need to be reached, and design programs so that they can be reached. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more to it. And the people who implement the programs must really have it in their heart to actually do the things. Education is not mechanical. Education is about caring. Education is about bringing up children. If you don't have it in your heart, then you're doing mechanical things about teaching what's in the textbook. The teacher must enjoy teaching much more than the child enjoys learning, I suppose. Then the child will learn. I am a teacher, and I enjoy teaching when I see smiles on the faces of people I'm teaching, or people as in children or otherwise. But if people are falling asleep when I talk, I don't think anybody's falling asleep now, then it's no fun. Then I can't reach anyone. So to reach the children, you need to do it from the heart, and not just mechanically, not because there is a scheme, not because there is a yojana. That is what is important.
Thank you for that important point on actually what do we mean by when we say reach the children, and so many other elements that come into when you're actually trying to reach the child and different mechanisms. Thank you for highlighting that. I feel like there's so many rich takeaways from this discussion, and there's so much more that we'd like to hear, but also just wanting to give a chance to the audience. So I'll take a few audience questions that we have received in the chat. There is one question for you, Shailendra, from Dr. Jay Shankar Shukla, which is would like to know a little bit more about how multilingual education is being implemented in Delhi.
How multilingual?
How multilingual education is being implemented in Delhi.
So yes, so Shankar would know it better himself, because he is a teacher in a Delhi government school, if I'm not wrong. That here is the situation. You have, because Delhi being a metro city, children from different states do come. But the primary language of engagement continues to be Hindi. We have other medium schools also. But this is like one of the challenge as to the child who is from a other linguistic background. In the initial year, what exactly happens in order to build language competency? What is the language of which is used? This is a challenge for the child coming from a different linguistic background. There are local school level initiatives that we have. So teachers among themselves pool in their resources in terms of, say, human resources, take each other's help. But as a matter of, say, a coherent, consistent approach to address the linguistic background of different children, I'm afraid there is not much policy, approach on that front. So, but this is one area where we have to still do a lot.
Right. Thanks for highlighting that. I think Delhi is uniquely complex.
And I know purposely he asked this question to get this point highlighted. So thank you, Jashankar, for bringing this up.
You can see his comments in the chat. He's thanking you for talking about how it's a challenge, but the government is trying to address it, which is the important point here. So thank you, Shailendra. We have a question for Usha ji, which is about what are the which is from Atul Bhinde, which new initiatives introduced during the pandemic would be worth continuing post-COVID during normal schooling days. So you talked about children measuring parameters, doing saplings. But would there be more initiatives like these that you would like to share about, which should, be actually continued post-COVID?
Yeah. See, whether it can continue, I think depends upon also what is the kind of initiatives which governments would take. Because any new kind of initiative, any new kind of a thing needs to be, you need to have kind of exemplars created. And where other teachers can actually go see a living example, a living example which is not a one-day thing or one-year thing, but a living example. If the state governments would see, for example, in every district, let's create an exemplar to see how this can actually happen, and ask the best people to get involved in it, create it. And that can be a nodal school, which can be place where teachers from others can come, see how it happens, what are the kind of issues. We need to bring in a little bit of that research. I mean, these are, and actually practice. You see, it was inherited from our, earlier centuries, that research happens somewhere and then it gets gone and applied. It's an actual practice which should be the basis for developing new, ideas, trying out, taking it. So if I think everyone has been talking about NEP, what is it? NEP can be just seen as a kind of a rough draft. I think that's what it is, which has a lot of contradictions, lack of clarity. But if it is seen by all the state governments to think that, okay, how do we kind of go about really building up foundational numeracy and literacy? Currently, foundational numeracy and literacy are seen from an adult's point of view. You need to reach here, so you work out little bit. It doesn't look at the child as a child. And what does the child feel? What is interesting for the child? How does the child make sense of the world? Making sense of the world, that needs to be the basis. And that's a really new way. I think, and the importance of socio-emotional thing, I think, Dr. Tasi, when we all know. So there is a shifting. And I think if state governments would take up something like that, and it can happen. So it's we have some few examples and experience to share, and a lot of videos and a lot of other kind of things. So that's all. But I think it's because I think it can happen. There are, I'm sure, people in every state who would really get into it and properly documented and done, and should continue. The nodal exemplars can't be created in one day, because those who get into it are going to be learning themselves. So it needs to continue and remain that kind of thing. I think that is the way, that's the path of science, isn't it? We need to really take that kind of a path where you actually try out, rather. If that happens, it will happen. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Usha ji. And I think just the sheer joy and conviction you have, implementing all of this comes across in your responses so well. And, while we would, of course, want to hear so much more, I'm going to take this last question, which is for Dr. Chawan, which is on the challenging issue of assessments. So given the school closures and the fact that learning is now happening across multiple settings, do you feel that there is a need to rethink assessments? And if yes, what should be the focus of these assessments?
Well, before assessment, we need to think about achievement. It is very clear, and recently we published data from Karnataka, which is showing how children have lost about 1 year's worth of reading skills, or their percentages of readers has dropped considerably. So if the foundational skills have been lost, then what's the point in getting children inside the school and then starting to teach them textbooks, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, or whatever grades, and then testing them on those? So I think first things first, they must do a catch-up program everywhere. The children must not only catch up what they've lost now, but we know that there are 50% children only who could read at 5th standard, I think this is the time, this is the opportunity to improve basic reading, writing, arithmetic levels substantially in the year. And then if there is an assessment, first assessment should be of foundational skills. It need not be the ASAR type of assessment. It can be slightly better than that. I mean, more complicated than if you want. That's possible. So, I would say step number one is to make sure that the students' foundational skills are right. Once that is, then we can talk about other assessments. Now, when you talk about assessment, it is all about, or whatever examinations, this is all about the curriculum and the age grade curriculum. I am fundamentally now against age grade curricula. I believe, and the new education policy is talking about stage-wise education as well. So given all that, how can we move from age grade curriculum, age grade examinations to stages is something that we need to consider. The second part in this is also that why should we even have this kind of restrictive, rigid curriculum? Why can't we open it up? And if that can be done, then the idea of assessment and examination, I know I'm using them interchangeably, I should not, can be completely different. I've had this kind of utopian thought. Just a second. So I had this thought. Oh, sorry about that. So as I was saying, so I had this thought that somehow the teacher always asks questions to which I did not know answers. What if I can go and say, I know this, and you assess me on this? Why can't you do that? And then I can find out what more I know. So the idea should not be to filter you out and say you don't know this and so you are out, but an assessment or examination that actually checks where you are and how far you can improve is the kind of assessment or examination that should be there. I don't know what you meant by assessment, whether you meant assessment as an assessment or as an examination.
Assessment as an assessment.
Oh, well,
But
I wasted your time then.
Not at all. It's never a waste of time to hear from you, Dr. Chawan.
The technology, give me a moment. The technology actually makes things very interesting because now you can, even if a child doesn't know how to write, if you ask the child a question, you can speak, can give an answer. And that answer by the speech to text technology can be written down. So the whole thing about assessment, the technology can change. I'm not saying, and this is not about technology in the child's hand necessarily. It can be in the assessor's hand. So whether you can, so we are only looking at reading and writing and arithmetic. It can be now speaking as well. So a lot of things will change with technology. In reading also, technology can actually check whether you're reading correctly, you're reading well, you're reading without mistakes, and that is possible. Okay, I better stop now.
Thank you. I think those insights are really useful. Whether someone is doing assessment or examination, it's all still relevant. And thank you for getting us started to think about it because this comes up a lot. We have another last question at a persistent request, which we would really like for Shailendra and Ushaji to answer. So the question is from Mini Srinivasan. The question is, while it is great that communities can get involved in children's learning, isn't there a danger of the government schools and teachers pushing the responsibility on communities and the blame of non-achievement of learning outcomes? So Shailendra, if you could answer first, please.
Well, I mean, it's not about shifting the responsibility. It's about sharing the responsibilities. And as I said in my remark, when the schools had to be shut, who did you reach out to? Who was your fallback option? I mean, eventually, it's the parents who you had to partner with. So it is like it should not be seen as a what you say emergency response mechanism also. It can be more like, say, as a normal process of engagement, and in that parents can really become partners for in the change. I remember when we were having summer camp, like I'm taking many of the examples of pre-COVID period, because what the point I'm trying to emphasize is that if you design your systems, which is going to take care of, I mean, you make like a fireproof house or not. You are going to create a system where the chances of your house catching fire is low, and if it does catches, here are your fire extinguishers. So that is how we will have to probably design our school systems also. So I was to share this example. We were organizing summer camps, and during summer vacation, we would see a lot of children along with their parents would go back to their native place. We were planning this summer camp, and I remember a teacher showing a chart to one of the parents who was planning to go to the village, and what she was indeed showing on that chart was, you see, here is where your child right now stands. It's a ladder. So your child is now reading a text intermittently, not fluently. But if you stay back for 25 days, the kind of thing we are going to do in the school, your child would be able to read this text fluently. Now, this mother, who herself has never been to school, but could understand what is being talked about. And she assured the teacher then and there, no, I'll make sure that I stay back along with my child. So this is the kind of partnership we will have to strike. It is not in isolation. Many often you will hear teachers complaining that you do not get adequate response from the child because of no support at home. So it's like a collective exercise. Nobody is taking away teacher's role, but nobody should also take away parents' role either. And in fact, what we learning from this situation, what we are again going to do in a very big way, is that we have a school management committee. I know what Giri shared earlier. I mean, that may be an experience in other states, but in Delhi, we took strengthening of a school management committee in a really serious manner. So, but what we also realized that with 12 or 14 parents member, it is very difficult for these 12, 14 members to be kind of be able to really make huge impact in schools which are like big sizes, 2,000, 3,000 there. So what we have recently launched was the parent outreach, parent engagement program, by which each parent is now reaching out to 50 other parents to enlist the support. So as a result, what you are going to do is to create a community of parents. Can we like use a school as a space to come together and learn from each other as to what we are doing with each other? Because in absence of that, what is also happening, Minal, is ki, apart from a regular what is happening in the classrooms, you have a parallel, a small scale private tuition kind of a thing. I'm not opposed to that, but what essentially we're trying to say is that the expectation of parents from the tutors is something which they themselves can also take care of. So as a result, we will have to reimagine this space and the relationship. It's not about taking away, it's about building a new collaborative framework.
I think really well said, Shailendra. It's not about shifting the blame, it's about sharing responsibility. I think that really sums it up, the way you described it, and then the examples that you shared from what's being done in Delhi. Thank you so much for that. Usha ji, what are your thoughts around this?
I agree with Shailendra that it is a partnership. It's especially a partnership if we are not thinking about learning, but about education, See, when we are thinking about both parents and teachers are involved in educating the child, and there has to be a partnership. And this is extremely important today because we know the very great importance of introducing good pedagogic practices into the classroom. Right? So at that time, teachers, parents might think in their own way, okay, ye abhi tak jama khata nahi seekha, abhi tak ye nahi seekha. They might kind of say that. And then so it is, unless they are taken into confidence and they understand, look, the child is learning in this way. This is what is the meaning of laying foundations. Wo to ho hi jayega, wo calculator bhi. But this is laying foundation. And that kind of a partnership is very much needed. You see, I mean, can go elaborate on it, but this is extremely important. And partly what happened when the classes were happening and the parents were seeing, they realized that ye sirf khel nahi raha, he is also studying with it, because otherwise they would, a child will come, kya kiya aaj khela. But that it just got so much well thought out, you know, pedagogically steps into it, that parents started realizing. And I think recently there was an incident where one parent said, "Aajkal na chota ladki, bahut, you know, she is really behaving like this. She is making us come together. Hamesha wo bolte koi baat nahi." You know, and then we also stop, you know, having a thing. I said, "Baby, koi baat nahi," something she has heard from her teacher saying, "Koi baat nahi." So it is also, you see, teachers can also play that kind of cultural role. You know, before independence, you know, at the time of the struggle, the teachers in the villages, they were the people who took new ideas to the places. Our teachers can play, you know, with, if they are but a lot of things we need to think about. It's a partnership, certainly.
Absolutely.
Meenal, a very small thing, when Usha ji shared that, it reminded me, like when we were doing feedback session with with parents, I remember in every session, at least one or two parents will get up, one or two, particularly fathers, would get up to say that for the first time, I'm getting to know what my child learns in this school, because this message coming, and most often they would be having the phone. So first they would be reading. So acha inke class mein abhi ye padhaya jata hai. So that was the kind of feedback we were getting, which was like very interesting to hear from them.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. Isn't that amazing, you know, father's involvement just happening because of technology, but them getting involved. And thank you, Usha ji, for bringing in that point of culture, because if you look at, you know, some researches that have been done, especially for the early years, when there is cultural congruence between school and home, you find that children learn the best, because, you know, there are all these elements that they can take between the multiple ecosystems. So we are a bit over time. I was wondering, Dr. Chawan, if you had any thoughts on this question.
No, you carry on. You're over time, so better stop.
No, please.
Okay, the only thought was, see, this partnership thing that Shailendra talked about between parents and the teachers, or the community and the school, is the right thing. But actually, fundamental responsibility to educate a child should be with the parents. And in that sense, I'm not saying the parents will be teaching them. But by saying that parent is not responsible and the teacher is responsible, or the school is responsible, but how do I hold the school or the teacher accountable to education? I can't do that. So it's very interesting that when the constitution was drafted, when the guiding principle was drafted, it said the state shall endeavor to provide for free and compulsory education up to the age of 14. Okay? It said provide for. And then when the constitution was amended to make education a fundamental right, it said education shall be, the state shall provide. And there was a debate on this. Provide or provide for? Because the teaching, if the see that it can go on, I can talk much more about it. The point is, if there is a per child expenditure that could be given to the child or to the parent, they can take care of the education, should they not? So I think there are a lot of points here to be considered as to when you say that the responsibility rests with the school, then you should make the school accountable as well. But it doesn't actually do that. The Right to Education Act doesn't make government or school accountable for giving education, as you call it.
That's a really important point to remind us about what the Constitution says, how it is meant to be. And I think that this is also like the perfect note to bring it all together, where children were always meant to be learning in multiple ecosystems. They were always meant to be learning in school, home, and community. And COVID now has thrown up this challenge, but also the opportunity where children are learning in multiple ecosystems. So it's all our endeavor, I think, all the various people here, to make sure that that happens and children continue to learn in a coherent manner across these multiple ecosystems. So before we close, my deep gratitude to all of our panelists, Dr. Chawan, Shailendra, Ushaji, as well as Giri, who's had to drop off because of a doctor's appointment. Thank you so much for your time, your sharing your experiences, your insights. We are all going to be walking away enriched. Thanks to all of that. And also to the audience for your time and patience, and for your participation on the chat. The chat was constantly buzzing, and such thought-provoking questions. Thank you so much. Back to you, Sukriti.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meenal. I guess we are running really short on time, although we definitely wouldn't mind more of that engrossing panel discussion that we just had. Such thought-provoking questions, such thoughts being shared by all the panelists there. So without any further delay, let me quickly invite Purnima Garg, Deputy Country Director, Room to Read India, to deliver the closing remarks and the vote of thanks. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of entire Room to Read family, I would like to offer our gratitude to all the speakers and the panelists. We appreciate how much each one of you has brought the unique dimensions of multiple learning ecosystem to the forefront. And your wisdom will help us pave a way to counter the learning loss, on the children who are facing this challenge throughout the nation. And I should mention a deep meaning of appreciation for Dr. Tammy, who joined us from Israel today, and her explanation of reading being a multifaceted reality. It is indeed, Dr. Tammy. And I was personally fascinated with the linkages you established for cognition, emotional, technology, and reading. So, that was really, really fascinating. And I would like to express our sincere thanks to Ms. Heather Simpson, who joined us from the States today, for giving excellent view of how children's literature helps support children's social, emotional well-being, and the role reading plays in helping children deal with the emotions. So I think emotion really became the center stage today, and we really figured out that how education needs to be looked at through a different lens, and that lens is emotion. So that was very, very enriching. And last but not the least, I would like to express my gratitude to our esteemed panelist, Dr. Chawan. Thank you so much for the insight that you gave today. You talked about, and I was really, as an organization, as a nonprofit working in the same space, it was really interesting to understand that if COVID was really the time to strive and complete the curriculum, but it was a time to support children stabilize. And thank you for stating that. That was very meaningful. And Shailendra, thank you so much for highlighting how Delhi government took steps, and these were some of the best practices many of us could adopt, and many other state governments could adopt. And bringing the learning from the past and exploring solution for today was really, really important highlight, I would say. And thank you, Ushaji, the way you beautifully weaved how it's important to relook at the literacy and learning and handhold parents, and how Giri kind of really brought this point that it cannot be we suddenly cannot start parents to be acting in a new normal wherein they become the teachers. And we beautifully closed it with how parent, teacher, and community play or work as partners in this difficult time. So it was a very, very meaningful discussion. And today, as a MCR of foundational literacy, we have successfully explored reaching beyond and focusing on all aspects of larger ecosystem. And I'm sure united, we can contribute to child's overall development to ensure that learning beats all odds and continues. And we are all inspired by each one of your great words. I would like to thank Meenal for moderating this session. Meenal, thank you. And you summarized the panel discussion very well, that how this multiple ecosystem, the learning in the multiple ecosystem was meant to be there always. It was not, it was just the COVID that helped us explore it once again. So thank you for summarizing it so well. And I would like to express my gratitude to all esteemed delegates of the webinar for their presence and contribution to make this webinar a great success. And thank you, the organizing team, volunteers, for working hard for the past few days to make this webinar successful. Thank you, everyone, once again for making it a great success. Good evening and Shubh Ratri. With this, we will close our session for today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.